There we go. And let me do a shout out to you, Brittany. Are you okay? Can you hear me?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yep, hear you just fine.
Perfect.
All right, you two wonderful people. Let's get this show on the road. Tonight, we are going to be looking at, well, let me start off again with my mea culpa on Module 1. As I've already talked to some of you about it, Module 1 is deliberately set up to be the frustrating mess that it is. Because what I wanted you to see, and that's what we're going to talk about tonight, is Module 1 is a perfect example of a paradigm that has not changed. Even though what we're doing has changed and people think it's a dramatic shift, i.e. online learning, when you look at Module 1, what I hope you saw in there was the fact that this sort of stuff's been around a long time. This is not anything really all that new. We just called it correspondence schools. And I can clearly remember as a kid sitting and looking at matchbook covers that on the inside of it, it had the little thing you could fill out and send to the Minnesota School of Art, where they would have a correspondence school that would teach you how to draw for cartooning, for comics, and for design on a matchbook cover. So it's this idea of learning in a distance format has been around, well, as long as there's probably been learning. What I wanted you to see, though, with this thing, the e-learning fundamentals, was what has happened is we haven't really changed the paradigm, sit and get, even though we're doing it through a new medium. And so what we're going to look at today in Module 2 is what makes up this new paradigm. And what the heck is a paradigm? We're going to look at all those little disparate pieces. I have a new setup here, which you can't see, obviously, where I can actually play videos and you can hear them. So I'm not going to play some of these videos all the way through them because some of them are kind of long, but I am going to play enough of them to make the points that I want you to understand. Also, realize that everything we do from Module 2 on, we are setting you up, and I don't mean that in a bad way, we are preparing you to understand quality matters, which will be the outline that you use to build your Google Classroom online class. Also, to state it again, this is strictly an outline. This is not, there's no anticipation of you putting this in front of kids. If you want to put it in front of kids, great, wonderful. And as I've said to you several times in the past, the way this usually works is people who are in this program who need an extra class, because the endorsement's only 12 hours, state recognizes it, all that good stuff, not a problem. But to get a raise, usually you need 15. If you want to turn around and do an independent study where you do take what we've created in this course and actually put it in front of kids, and then you work with me and we figure out how it's going with kids. I do at least 3 or 4 of those every semester where people have taken this class and turn around and do that with their kids. So without further ado, oh, and as I've said in everything I've sent you, everybody gets an A in Module 1 because you put up with all that silliness. But I tell you, in all seriousness, I can remember the first time that I helped set up a learning quote-unquote lab that was made up of a bunch of networked IBM PS2s. And it was called CCC. And I can't remember what the 3 C's stood for. It was something course something. It was the name of the company who created it, course something. And the whole idea of that was, and this was in an elementary school. It was in Wilkerson Elementary School, Wellington Elementary School. The kids would come into this room and they would sit down, and it wasn't even as advanced as put headphones on and let somebody talk to you like we've done in the past with course recovery stuff, Study Island, Success Maker, that sort of thing. This was strictly read. Read, 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 read on the screen. And the thing that you come back to is, yeah, we could argue about the gee whiz golly, why aren't you making this more interactive with kids? Why aren't you making this more where it's engaging kids? We can do all that. But after tonight, what I'm trying to get you to start seeing is there are still very large pieces being left out of that model, that paradigm. And it's not that hard to put those pieces into place. That is what Module 2 and Module 3 are all about. So in Module 2, I have basically 4 ideas that I'm pushing at you. The first idea comes from a gentleman by the name of Terry Anderson. I actually know Terry. Terry came from the University of Toronto School of Education, where I spent 4 years, 5 years, working with a group of folks there whose work in knowledge building you're going to see in Module 3. And he went on to teach over at the University, I don't know if they call it Athabasca or if it's called University of or Athabasca University. But everybody who came out of that program came out of it with a very straightforward idea. And that is that online education has to be student-centered. If it's sit and get, then you'll end up with the same results that you get from your class. In other words, just people coming in and sitting and you doing your thing with them. People always have asked me why I went there. And I told them, well, because Jefferson County Public Schools sent me there. Because Jefferson County Public Schools was trying to get its head around this whole online learning stuff because of what we did in something called eSchool. And what we came away with from the folks in Canada was very interesting. First of all, if you think about distance ed in Canada, why are they some of the leaders? Australia is too, by the way. Now that should give you a hint. They're great big empty places. You know, Canada, people don't realize this. Canada is #1 in the world in terms of its size. A big place. But it's also doesn't have a very large population. And it's very much, everybody is clustered on the coast, you know, the East Coast and the West Coast in Canada. The largest city in Canada is Toronto, where I spent lots of time. Canada does not have a federal government like we think of in the United States. They call it a federal government, but what Canada really has is a confederation. And so the provinces in Canada, which are the same as states, provinces in Canada have the most power. And so when you look at provincial government education programs, it has a much, much bigger impact than, say, the federal education program has there. A lot of people, a lot of conservatives in the United States look to Canada for sort of a, well, we should be more like them. But you have to remember, great big place, very resource rich, not a whole lot of people. And because there's not a whole lot of people in Canada, they have avoided some of the issues that, you know, America kind of gets a little shamefaced about, specifically toward Natives people. The First People, that's what they're called in Canada, are very much more revered. And because it's such a large area, they haven't lost their land like, of course, all the Native Americans did in the United States. But here's the thing, Australia and Canada, big places, small amount of people. Education there very quickly came to realize that the best way to reach everyone is through distance learning. Now, distance learning, of course, as you saw in that first module, in Canada and Australia, was done originally through radio. And if you're as old as I am, you can remember that Louisville Public Radio was not always Louisville Public Radio. It wasn't always just the news and kind of funky music and classical music that it is now, When it was located down in the library at 3rd and Broadway, it was very much an educational tool. And it was a part of the, get ready for it, the Kentucky Education Network. And they would literally broadcast classes out of there. Now, along came KET, Kentucky Education Television, and took over all of that from them. But what I'm trying to show you here is this model of using technology for education has been around a long time. What is so different that has changed all this is people like Terry Anderson. This guy's name is Joel Parker, and he's not really as much into education as he is a futurist, talking about a concept called paradigms, which we'll look at here in just a second. And then one of my heroes, Ken Robinson. Again, I'm not going to run all this the way through on Ken's paradigm of education, but you do need to look at it because, man, it's full of some good stuff. And then here's the old man of the whole group. This is John Abbott, Dr. John Abbott out of Stanford University. He is a big name in the history of education. He's right up there with Dewey. He's one of those guys, a good friend of mine, a guy by the name of Bereiter, Carl Bereiter, is also in that pantheon. They're all buddies. But he is explaining constructivism, which we'll talk about in a second. And then the last piece is the inquiry-based learning. All of these pieces, when you put them together, gives us a new idea about what online learning should be. So let me go up here. And I'm going to start with Terry here. I'm going to let this play. The sound on it is not horrible, but I don't know what happened to this video. But it doesn't come. She's kind of it kind of warbles. I guess that's the best way to describe it. But she does a really nice job of breaking all this down. And the chapter from his book is right here. And, you know, I could make you sit and read this thing, and you would probably hate me. Because what he does is he goes through all the different theories of learning, and then he equates them into how online learning can work. So I'm going to let you listen to this, and if you guys find it too hard to listen to, in other words, through my speakers here or through this setup here, yell at me. I'll stop it, and I'll go back through, and we'll talk it through. Okay, but this is pretty good. So I'm going to try it. Let's see how it comes out.
Toward a Theory of Online Learning by Terry Anderson. In this article, the author does not propose a specific theory, but rather raises other theories and important factors that contribute to the flexible working of a theory. He discusses the idea of an adaptive curriculum, one that is content-centered, assessment-centered, learning-centered, and community-centered. Basically, there is no right answer towards what is an online learning, but a theory that would dictate an effective online experience. The author describes those concepts a little deeper. In learner-centered environment, the needs of the individual learner are recognized. In this center, the teacher recognizes the individual traits and prior knowledge of the student. The learner center also respects individual differences, cultural attributes, for example, in looking at language. The instructor must also be in tune to learner comfort levels with technology and provide a safe and secure learning environment. In knowledge-centered environments, instructors cannot just teach generalized thinking skills, but students need to have opportunities to experience an authentic learning opportunity where they can reflect on this learning. Students need an opportunity to reflect in order to transfer knowledge from unfamiliar contexts and develop new knowledge structures. Assessment-centered learning happens when effective formative assessment is designed to motivate, inform, and provide feedback to student and instructor. Effective online learning provides many opportunities for this to occur with the teacher, peers, and for students to assess their own learning reflectively.
I'm going to stop right there. I'm going to pick up now. That's a nice job, by the way. Can you hear her okay?
Yeah, that was fine.
Yeah, okay. Let me jump back in here so I can help you understand where Terry is in his writing. So what Terry is trying to get at here is what the internet provides. What it provides is the affordances that allow this kind of thing to go on very easily. We've been talking about kids reflecting upon their learning forever and a day. But if you think about structures of any online environment, but specifically, let's start thinking about Google Classroom, because that's what we're going to focus into. The beauty of it is you have that ability for ideas to become the center of the instruction. And I'm going to pick this theme up in just a second. If we move ideas to the center of the instruction, and then kids' ideas about it are then available for everyone to read or hear with Chromebooks and WeVideo, that's a built-in extension in Chrome. Putting your ideas in front of people is in another form other than writing, in other words, video, is extremely simple to do. I had a student who did this class and then took her shell that she created in this class and actually did it with kids. She was a music teacher. And so what she was doing with kids was she would use the Google Classroom as a way to show kids how to play a ukulele. And then kids basically did their own videos, again, using Chromebooks, using WeVideo, where they would play and they would explain to you why, because they had to do two different kinds of videos. They had to do a video where they basically played something that she taught them, a piece of music. But then they had to come back and change up the piece of music and explain what tempo, all the things that they did differently to the piece of music. Now, you have the affordance to do that in something like a Google Classroom setting. And you have the ability for kids to use another tool other than just writing. The beauty of writing reflectively in an environment like what Google Classroom gives us is the ability for others to comment. It also then has a built-in ability for you to teach kids how to do social discourse. I always put it this way when I would go out and teach kids about this. I would say it's very simple for us to go, yo mama, or make some kind of snarky comment about something somebody has done. Boy, you must be dumb. That's easy to do. What you need to learn is how people who are in R&D departments, or people who are in academia, people who are in just regular old jobs, learn how to talk to each other and how to do things like, what I read, what I heard you say is this what you meant? If you can get kids to start talking that way in a classroom, in other words, honoring what the person has written, we call it PQP, praise, question, propose. So you say something to somebody and say, I read your idea. It has some merit to it. Here's my questions about it. Did you think about this? How did you solve that? Propose. Could you go back and do something else to show me again how you did that? If you can get kids to do something as simple as that, then an online learning becomes not just an online place, it becomes a community of learners. And this is Terry's point. What Terry's trying to get you to start seeing is if we can get kids to start talking about the ideas of learning as opposed to just jumping through the hoops of learning, then what we see is kids start being more engaged. Now I'll let her talk for a little bit more.
In community center environments, members of a learning community both support and challenge each other, leading to effective and relevant knowledge construction. Wilson in 2001 have described participants in online communities as having a shared sense of belonging, trust, expectation of learning, and commitment to participate and to contribute to the community. An example of this you can look at is the Federation Academic Digital Imaging System, FADIS, which is a learning management.
Okay, I'm going to stop her there because that's, she's just doing a commercial now. But you see what I'm saying here is communities of learners can become very, very powerful ways for kids to share ideas. So in something as simple as Google Classroom, and this is where Google Classroom shines, by the way. One of the reasons why I was involved with the University of Toronto School of Education was back then they had a program called Knowledge Forum, and we implemented it in Jefferson County Public Schools. And so I got first sent up there to, click here, go there, drop down here, this kind of thing. But quickly, what we realized was the theory behind all this from people like Terry Anderson and John Abbott was so amazingly new to what we could be doing with kids that when we brought it back here to Jefferson County, and at our biggest, what were we? We were 36 schools, 100 and some odd teachers, And what we were trying to do was to change a paradigm about what we could be doing with kids. Now, Knowledge Forum at the time was frankly very technologically intensive. And you really had to have a lot of technology work right for it to work. And that was its failing. Now, when you look at something like Google Classroom, where it is so simple and so clean and elegant, then we can revisit all of these ideas, all these theories, because now the technology fades into the background. Where do you click? Where do you post? Where do you do this? How do you do that? That all fades away. So now we can really focus on what we've been trying to do with kids. There you go. That was that chapter. Now let's talk about paradigm shifts. This guy's name is Joel Barker. His videos are rather entertaining. I'm going to say they were made in the 80s. So they're kind of fun to watch, looking at what people were wearing and all of that. They don't look all that different, frankly. And he does a really nice job in these videos. As I said, they're worth watching, but I'm not going to make you sit through them because these are long. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you what he says in there. It's very simple. I'll let you watch. I'm going to let you watch a little bit so you can kind of get the gist.
From boardrooms to shop floors all over the world, good ideas are shot down by people who assume that the future is merely an extension of the past, that the ideas that have brought us to where we are today are the same ideas that are going to take us to tomorrow. My name is Joel Barker. I'm a futurist. I worked with corporations and institutions all over the world, helping them to improve their ability to evaluate new ideas and to anticipate change. For almost 20 years, I've been studying change. In particular, I've been studying the resistance to change that often keeps a great new idea from being accepted. You see, it's never been any different. Whether that great idea was a better way to do company business or a scientific breakthrough, people have always resisted change. In Venice, in the 16th century, that was Galileo's problem. He was an advocate of the Copernican theory that the sun, not the earth, was the center of the solar system. To prove that theory to the leaders of the day, he took them to the top of that tower, the Tower of San Marco. And there, using his newly perfected telescope, he showed them the discoveries he had made in the night sky that verified that the earth revolved around the sun and not the other way around. Well, to say the least, that was a revolutionary idea. It contradicted obvious observation. In fact, it so antagonized the voices of authority that Galileo was threatened with torture in order to get him to retract his position. You thought you had trouble selling your ideas. Yeah.
Okay, I'll stop it there. Could you hear him? I don't know why that's so quiet.
Yeah, I can hear him.
All right.
I heard him, yep.
Okay, what he goes on to do in this video, which is really cool, and I'm not going to make you sit through it because you can watch it on your own, but I really, really want you to watch it. He takes you through this little card thing, and I won't spoil it for you. He takes you through this little card identification thing, and he uses that as a way for you to realize how your paradigms affect you every single day. So let's define things here. What's a paradigm? A paradigm is nothing more than the way we do things. And we live with them every day. In fact, we couldn't exist without paradigms. We have a paradigm for how we set the table. We have a paradigm for whoever cooked, the others have to clean up. You know, we have all of these little rules and models that we follow in our everyday lives. If you were here physically with me in this classroom, we would do what I call the shoe paradigm. I would tell you to kick off your shoes and put your shoes back on. And then I would tell you to kick your shoes off again and put your shoes back on, but the opposite way. In other words, if you kicked your left shoe off, then you have to put your right shoe on first. You would then have to reverse that. And what people acknowledge is that's uncomfortable or awkward. Probably awkward's a better word than uncomfortable. But this is what Barker found, is that this permeates everything we do. He then talks a lot about an American scientist, philosopher of science, a guy by the name of Thomas Kuhn, K-U-H-N, a huge name in science philosophy. And Kuhn came up with a startling discovery. What he was looking at was what was preventing American industry from changing. There's a very famous story about a gentleman who worked for General Motors, who basically was advocating a new way of doing the assembly line at GM. GM kicked him out. Now, this was in the early 1950s. So he was kind of wandering around trying to find a new job. And he heard of the new car companies that were coming on board in Japan were looking at different ideas about car manufacturing. So he went there. And he basically initiated his ideas at Toyota Motor Company. And there for a while there, especially in the 70s, I don't know, you all probably aren't that old, but in the 70s, one of the things that people used to do when we went through the first gasoline crisis is they used to drive Toyotas in the parking lots, and they took turns beating them to death with sledgehammers and things, because it was all the Japanese fault, because they built these really, really nice gas efficient cars, and the Americans were stuck with these big boats. You know what he called his new theory? It was called participatory management, giving the guys on the line a say in how the cars were built, because they knew best. Hey, really what we ought to be doing is doing these steps first and then these steps next, instead of the way that the company thinks we ought to do it. That idea of participatory management came directly to the state of Kentucky. And it became the basis for site-based decision-making in the state of Kentucky. The idea that the people who are in the school know what's best for the school is a direct plant from participatory management. The idea of paradigms is so firmly in place. Let's look at online learning. So as Terry just talked about, the affordances that we get from having a way to have a community where ideas take root. In other words, they actually have substance because you've written something that lives somewhere. What was John's idea about what we learned in class? Well, let's go look in the Google Classroom. Oh yeah, John, you wrote that this, and this. Yeah, that's what I thought. Well, I think that's got some merit to it, John. Let's share that with the rest of the class and see what they think. That's a paradigm shift, kids. That's a big paradigm. Now, you could do that, you could say, I'm a good teacher, Steve. We have those kind of discussions in my class all the time. Yes, but the beauty of distance learning is that an online learning gives you a repository for those kind of ideas. Carl Breiter, in all of his writing, he postulates that knowledge is real. In other words, the knowledge that we carry around in our brain, the artifacts of knowledge that we carry around in our brain, are very, very real. And all you got to do is look at the political climate that we live in right now. You have people who think certain ideas are the exact ideas that we all should be following. And then you have people who are saying, no, no, these ideas are the ideas we all should be following. Knowledge artifacts are real. It's like when you sit down and you try to talk to someone about a new way of doing something. That knowledge artifact they carry around in their head will always trump what you try to offer. The paradigm that we use, paradigm, knowledge artifact, the knowledge artifact makes the paradigm. They're very hard to give up. And that's what Thomas Kuhn found in his research. Paradigm shifts are very, very rare. Let me say that again. Paradigm shifts are very, very rare. And here's why. To do a paradigm shift, you have to go all the way back to zero. You have to go all the way back to zero. You have to go all the way back to, we're starting all over. Now, you see that all the time. You see the fake version of that all the time. Like right now in Jefferson County Public Schools, they're all crazy about deep learning, as if it's some brand new thing. Well, the guy whose book that you read, if you were in the 585 class, Stratosphere, Michael Fullen, he actually came up with deep learning. It was a part of his change theory. And so what they're running around saying, this is a paradigm shift. And the digital backpack is a paradigm shift. No, it's not. The digital backpack is portfolios that we used to have kids write back in the day, except now we're putting a digital gloss on them. That somehow they're going to have pieces they put into this digital backpack, which is nothing more than a folder inside of a Google Classroom. And there you are. So what would be the paradigm shift of that? Well, the paradigm shift of that would be that the Google Classroom would represent that community center, that hub of knowledge where a teacher's classroom could be, here's my idea about what we've learned. Here's my idea about what we've learned. And then you have that give and take that kids love to have, especially middle school kids, about their ideas. And you have this ability now to actually have permanence to it. The affordances of the internet, as Terry talks about. You have permanence now that people can go back and look at it and go, oh, that's what we were thinking. Well, we're not thinking that anymore. I'm going to show you one more little piece from Joel, then we'll move on. Hold on to that thought about that's not what we're thinking anymore. Now, I'm going to let you watch this, and I got to be careful because this blast. I don't know why the other two are so quiet and this one's so loud.
There's a story I'd like to tell you now. There once was a young man with a very fast car who loved to drive on country roads. He thought of himself as a great driver. He could handle anything. One day he was out driving his favorite road and coming into his favorite curve, when around the curve came a car careening out of control, and just before it got to him, it pulled into its lane. As it passed, the woman yelled out, "Pig!" Well, he responded in a flash and shot back, "Cow!" He thought to himself, how dare she call me a name? I was in my lane. She was the one who was all over the place. But he felt rather smug because he got her before she got away. And so he put the accelerator to the floor, whipped around the curve, and ran into the pig. Now that's a paradigm story. You see, the young man was responding with old rules. You call me a name, I'll call you a name. Yet, when you think about it, she was really trying to warn him. I believe the next 10 years are going to be filled with people coming around blind curves yelling things at you. And if you have paradigm flexibility, what you will be hearing will be opportunities. But if you have paradigm paralysis, what you will be hearing will sound like threats. The choice will be entirely yours.
Isn't that good? I really, really like that. Think about it. So what is coming around the corner yelling pig at you? Well, I'll give you a perfect example. If you were to go down to the Kentucky Department of Education and sit in their meetings of initiatives and innovations, one of the things that they're talking a lot about is how do we move to an online educational environment. Now, one of the things I'm always shocked by is, well, I didn't get to do it this year because K-TIP's kind of on vacation right now. As I said, K-TIP packed up, went down to the Gulf for a while. I used to go to the Archdiocese, and I used to train the new teachers in the Archdiocese about the K-TIP process. And one of the things that I started asking people in that process was how many of them were going to be expected to have some kind of online presence as a part of their teaching in the Archdiocese. Now, I'm picking on the Archdiocese because, to me, it represents the oldest bureaucracy that exists in the world, the Catholic Church. So here we are dealing with people who are in a bureaucracy that's 2,000 some odd years old. And we're asking them about something that most people would consider very, very current. 80% would raise their hands and say, we're expected to have a Saturday class or a Sunday or a snow class. Some places like DeSales have a full-blown curriculum they put into place. Elementary schools were expected to do this kind of stuff. So what is happening here is the folks down in the Kentucky, and I've said this and I'll say it again, those of you who are in public education who teach in a high school, I will bet you then 5 years or less, you will have a period in your day that is called e-school, online class, Mr. Smith's online. It'll look something like that. Because what will start happening is these separate entities we have called e-schools, course recovery, they're going to get pushed back into schools because A, we just don't have that many kids, and B, it's very expensive to do that. In other words, have a whole separate building, whole separate faculties, everything like that. Makes much more sense to put it back into a high school where it'll start, because high schools are constructed for that kind of thing. You know, you have these very separate periods during the day. Elementary will be the last place it happens because you just don't have that kind of separation. But that, I bet you, in 5 years or less, will be very common throughout high schools in the state of Kentucky. And it's not because Steve says so. It's because the Department of Education says so. It'll start over in the eastern part of the state because everything always starts over in the eastern part of the state. And as soon as they can validate it, in other words, they can say, look, kids are taking classes online because they can't get to school. Well, how are they going to get to the classes, Steve? What about the digital divide here? Will every kid have some way to get to a class? Yep. That's already starting now, too. Look at Jefferson County's experiment with iPads. Wrong experiment, by the way. Should be Chromebooks because it fits everything very nicely. You know, I'm not an Apple hater. Those of you who know me, you know that's not true. But what I'm also saying is the device that's going to make it all work is going to be that Chromebook and the Google Classroom because they are so interconnected. Paradigm shift. What we want to do is, as we look at these paradigm shifts, we want to have something that goes back to zero and says, okay, I can sit here and I can talk just like this idiot right now who's, in front of you is yammering at you, or we can build communities of learners where the curriculum then not only becomes my job to uncover for kids, but it becomes their job to discover. A very famous guy by the name of Phil Schlechte, who is actually based here in Louisville, always had this wonderful line about schools are where kids go to watch teachers teach, when it should be the exact opposite. Schools are where teachers go to watch kids learn and to help them learn. Ken Robinson. Let's watch just a little bit of this. This is a fairly long video, and I'm not going to make you sit through it, but it's worth watching. Boy, I got all kinds of noises, don't I? He quits doing this, by the way, when it starts.
Every country on earth at the moment is reforming public education. There are two reasons for it. The first of them is economic. People are trying to work out, how do we educate our children to take their place in the economies of the 21st century? How do we do that, given that we can't anticipate what the economy will look like at the end of next week, as the recent turmoil is demonstrating? How do we do that? The second, though, is cultural. Every country on earth is trying to figure out, how do we educate our children so they have a sense of cultural identity and so that we can pass on the cultural genes of our communities while being part of the process of globalization. How do we square that circle? The problem is they're trying to meet the future by doing what they did in the past. And on the way, they're alienating millions of kids who don't see any purpose in going to school. When we went to school, we were kept there with a story, which was if you worked hard and did well and got a college degree, you would have a job. Our kids don't believe that. And they're right not to, by the way. You're better having a degree than not, but it's not a guarantee anymore. And particularly not if the route to it marginalizes most of the things that you think are important about yourself. Some people say we have to raise standards as if this is a breakthrough. Like really, it's like we should. Why would you lower them? I haven't come across an argument that persuades me of lowering them. But raising them, of course we should raise them. The problem is that the current system of education was designed and conceived and structured for a different age. It was conceived in the intellectual culture of the Enlightenment and in the economic circumstances of the Industrial Revolution. Before the middle of the 19th century, there were no systems of public education. Not really. I mean, you could get educated by Jesuits, if you had the money. But public education, paid for from taxation, compulsory to everybody and free at the point of delivery, that was a revolutionary idea. And many people objected to it. They said it's not possible for many street kids, working class children, to benefit from public education.
Okay, I'm going to stop in there because a great video. Watch it. Really good. But what I want to get to is this idea about we're losing people left and right. It was one of the reasons why we came up with JCPS High School, is we were acknowledging the fact there are kids who just can't do the rigor, or not the rigor, they can't do the schedule, of high school. And they need a way to have a job, help with the family, et cetera, that they then could complete their education. The question that is now raging out there, and you hear this in Kentucky now a lot, is why do we need to send everybody to college? You've heard your governor talk about we don't need people who are majors in French literature. There's truth in that. There's truth in that. What we need is we need a new way that we can diversify what a educational experience might be. We used to have that. We called it voc ed. And then we walked away from that when we said everybody should go to college. Not everybody is the kind of person who should go to college. They're the kind of people who like to work with their hands as well as their minds. They're the kind of people who like to be outdoors. They're the kind of people who, frankly, when they come to your house to fix something, make more money than you and I do. What we need to realize is, again, the power of the affordances offered by the internet, by the ability to create online environments, gives people a chance to experience that kind of stuff. Now, here at the University of Lowell College of Education, we do that with people who are in the military. And we have all these online experiences for them to come back and earn degrees in understanding what it is to be a trainer. And there's something very wrong with that, if you think about it. There's no imparting of new knowledge. It's pretty much a sort of here, 1, 2, 3, kick. You know, it's like when we teach math to kids and we go, if you'll just do step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, here's the answer. But if we don't do what Wiggins and McTeague, the guys who came up with Understanding by Design, a seminal work in curriculum design, say that all education is understanding that is applied. And then learning occurs. And you know that. You know that as well as I do. 15 minutes after somebody tells you something, you need to know this. Here, 1, 2, 3, 4. Have you ever gone and bought a new car? And then the person comes out and says, let me show you all the cool things about your new car. When I bought my wife her new 2017 Escape, it had everything in it. Everything. It had adaptive cruise control. It had front braking, if something walked out in front of the car. It had if something passes behind the car, it beeps at you. It had blind spot monitoring. It had self-parking. You name it, it was in that car. How much of that do you think she uses? She likes the fact that when she backs up, it has the cross traffic alert. The thing beeps more than it drives you crazy how much it beeps at you. She likes the fact that when she pulls into places, it beeps at you when you're getting too close to things. She has yet to use the adaptive cruise control, and she has never used the parking. 15 minutes the guy took to show her how to do all this. Understanding. So the button is there. If you want to do a parallel park and it's on your left-hand side, you push the button and you drop the turn signal to the left-hand turn signal, and that signals the car that you want to make a parallel park on the left-hand side. The understanding is there. How many times did she get to do it at the dealership? None. She sat and watched the guy do it. He showed her how to work the radio. She has that classic sync, where you can push a button and you can say, please tune to such and such. Same thing with Sirius. She's got that as well. How does she go to radio stations? There's a knob in the car. It's one of the things that Ford trumpets about their cars. We've got knobs that you can turn up the volume and tune in stations. Now, my wife's not dumb. What it is she has an understanding of what the paradigm of finding radio stations in her car is. She's never applied doing it any other way, so there's no new learning. There's another paradigm story for you. So this is good stuff. This Robinson's Changing Education Paradigms. By the way, as an aside, the whiteboard drawing thing that they employ in this is available to you in our Go Animate for Schools. I don't know if you all ever played around with that whiteboard thing that's in there. It's kind of cool. We're almost done. Here's our good old friend John Abbott.
One of the pedagogic theories that's been around now for 30, 40 years is a thing called constructivism. Constructivism, in a sense, is very, very simple. It actually says you never learn anything absolutely from scratch. When you have a new idea, you see how it relates to something you'd already got in your brain, and you sort of construct a bigger framework and a bigger framework and a bigger framework. Its origin goes, well, in the 20th century anyway, its origin goes back to a guy called Vygotsky, who was a Russian psychologist who died in exile somewhere in the middle of Russia. It was 20 years before his papers were smuggled out. But he spelled out this business that already the psychologists could begin to see that the successful learner is the person who starts off with a pool of ideas that they really understand. They then come to a new idea, and they sort of embed that new idea in the old idea, and it carries on, going on and on and on to get bigger and bigger and bigger. One of the key thoughts that comes out of constructivism is actually a challenge to the education system, because a constructivist never sees something totally objectively. Now, this is very interesting, because modern science and modern lifestyle say, don't be subjective, always be objective. A constructivist would say there's no such thing as being subjective.
Boy, now that is, I think, one of the seminal things that we need to understand about what we're going to be designing here. Let me give you a constructivist story. So I love water gardens. When I'm not being a total nerd, the thing that I love to do is to garden. I love building gardens. I love naturalistic gardens, if you understand what that means. I have a perennial bed that runs along my driveway. And every year about this time, my neighbors who you would come down the sidewalk and compliment me on the beauty of my perennial beds are now walking by going, why are you letting everything turn all brown and go to seed? Well, it's because the major flower that's in my perennial bed are different varieties of echinaceas, cone flowers, the pretty purple ones, which you now get in all kinds of colors. And the reason why we let them go to seed is because the goldfinches come in at this time of the year, and they are eating the thistle out of the echinaceas. And so when you pull into my driveway, this kind of brownish, sort of past its time bush, because that's how big they get, black and brownish seed tops are now ablaze in a golden color that represents all the birds that are sitting there eating them. And when you pull in, the birds all go flying off. It's a beautiful sight. Constructivists. Let me go back to my story. The first pond I ever built, I went to Lowe's and I bought essentially a plastic bathing pool, a swimming pool. And I brought it home. I dug a hole in the ground, stuck it in, put rocks all around it, planted some plants, and filled it up with water, and stood back and admired it, thought what a wonderful thing I had created. Then I went and bought some fish and put it in there. And the fish thrived for about a month. And then I came out one morning and they were all floating on their sides, top of the water. And I thought, what is wrong here? I bought a big enough thing so there was plenty of surface area that would allow the oxygen and the gases to pass back and forth. So my original theory of what a water pond was like was all wrong. I had to come up with a new theory. So I took my ideas about what I wanted to do and what I thought I should do, and I started researching. And I came across an idea called eutrophication. It's an environmental education term, by the way. And basically eutrophication says this: any environmental area, entity, that does not have a way of refreshing itself will go along just fine for a while. But then it'll go into a death spiral called eutrophication, where it'll just start spiraling down faster and faster and faster until the environmental entity collapses. So the environmental thing I had to learn about my pond was, when fish live in ponds, they don't go to the bathroom. They go to the bathroom in the same water they're swimming around in. And all of that waste settles to the bottom of the pond. And because there's nothing there to do anything with the waste, it then starts releasing gases into the water, and there's nothing in the water then to take up those gases And then this quickly develops into a very toxic environment. The simple answer to it is to plant plants. In other words, to mimic what nature does. And so the next thing I did is I started putting plants into my pond, because the plants then take up the nutrients that the fish put into the water. Redid that, added fish back in, went for about 2 months now, fish up on our side. What did I do wrong now? So the more that I kept reading and the more I kept testing and trying to figure out what was going on with this pond, the more new information I was getting and the better I got at pond design. And so I realized that not too long that I needed to have the water to be recycled, to be moving, to have an ability to move the water through a way that I might have to filter out some of the larger things, dead leaves, etc., that might come into the pond. Or I need to have a much larger area that could handle the kind of debris that naturally falls into water. So I went from having this little bathtub-sized pond to the last pond I had was about 19 by 10 feet. And it was glorious. It was full of beautiful fish, turtles, frogs. The water was handled through a skimmer, which was a big box that you put in that had a pump. And the pump basically would take the water and it would skim it through just a netting. And then it would pump it up to where there were these biological filters that were nothing more than big spongy-like things that when the water passed through them, the aerobic bacteria that could grow in that would then capture it, and the water then would return to the pond clean. I discovered in my readings I could do the very same thing in a much smaller form factor, 10 feet by 19 feet. You know, it's kind of like, what did you do, give up the whole yard? I could do the very same thing with something just as a waterfall, which was very simple to build. You basically take a 5-gallon Lowe's bucket and you put in your bottom so the water doesn't run out, and you bury the Lowe's bucket down in the bottom. In other words, you dig a hole, you put the covering in there, and you make a place for the bucket to fit into it. And then you do basically the same thing. You just run your piping up to a height, and then it runs back down into the pond. And the beauty of that system is because the water is constantly moving, you don't have any trouble with eutrophication. And the debris gets sucked into the bucket where there's a filter there, a screen. And so once a week I go out and basically take the screen out, wipe it off, put it back in, turn it back on, and have a beautiful large waterfall that provides a wonderful background noise to when I'm sitting out onto the deck. That, my friends, is a constructivist story. The idea that we take the knowledge that we all carry around in our heads and we apply it to a test, a hypothesis, and then we basically say, did this hold up under that or does it not? Constructivism, which takes us to the last stop. Inquiry-based learning. This is going to tie everything up that we've just talked about in a nice little bow. like that video. That really does a nice job of summing everything up that we're doing here. Let's take it just one more step to explain how it could look in an online learning situation. So as we saw, let me see if I can get that back. Nope, I'm going to do it that way. That would get us in trouble. Let me close that window out. And let's see if I can pull up, well, anyway, where they had that list where they were talking about these are the things that it should have. There it is. All right, get out of the way. All right, let's look at this IBL list. Question. The hardest thing for anyone to do as a teacher is to ask good questions. You know, we spent days of professional development helping teachers understand how to ask good questions. For us as human beings, not teachers, but everybody, asking a question is one of the hardest things for us to do because we have such a hard time figuring out what it is I'm really asking the question about. But if we can get kids to start doing that and then to do a hypothesis, we don't have to call it hypothesis. We can call it my theory, my thinking. This is what I think. And then go in and actually look at it. And, you know, people get this confused with science. They think, well, we're teaching scientific method. Yeah. But what you're really doing is you're trying to teach a way of thinking. So here's my hypothesis. Here's what I'm going to do to test it out. And then here's what happened. Analyze data. Reach conclusions. Well, here's what I did. Here's what happened. So I think this is what I have. Communicate results. What better place to do this than inside an online environment that you have structured so that everybody sees everybody's stuff and we have a community of learners who are critical learners and friends to everyone else so that they can go in and they can say, well, I read what you wrote, but had you thought about this? Have you thought about that? I think IBL has a bad habit of sort of seeing that this is a closed system. I don't see it as a closed system. I think that when kids are allowed to creatively think about their learning, do they come up with answers? Sure, because sometimes there are things that have answers. The answer to the problem of how do I design a fountain that is 12 feet high, how big a basin does it then need? Well, that's how we plug in quadratic formulas, by the way, folks, because it's area under curve. We have answers. But then, let's go to application. So how big a pump? How big a space? You see, answers should always then raise new questions. One of the things that I found so fascinating working with kids in all of this was in an environment where they were allowed to think this way. The knowledge never stopped. Teacher moved on because teachers always have to move on because teachers always have to deal with units and curriculum and so on. But what we found was when we went back and looked at the primitive databases that we developed for knowledge form, was that kids would go back into those questions. And they would say, you know, what we're studying now made me think about this idea that we talked about back in here. Right. Because we had so indoctrinated them. Yes, it was an indoctrination. Every Friday, kids got up and we did what we called a stand and defend. So what have you been writing about this week? Stand and defend. Now, in a Google Classroom, that stand and defend could be a part of a Friday experience. Kids don't have to get up in front of the group. They have to go into the Google Classroom and stand and defend. Here's what my thinking is about what we've been learning. All right, so those are the pieces of what we're talking about in Module 2. Now, if we go back and look at what we're asking you to do in this module, it's pretty straightforward. You'll create a voice thread introducing us to your thinking about the topic foundations of online learning. Synthesize your reading, viewing, and discussion into a slide presentation with at least 5 slides that may include text, PowerPoint, video, and audio comments. You must explain your voice thread by narrating, using the commenting feature. Include an introductory slide, which basically says, hi, I made this. And then you're going to synthesize together all these ideas. Question, how much do I need to show you about VoiceThread?
I mean, it's been a little, but I know as soon as I start to look back in there, I should be good to go.
Britt, did you ever do a VoiceThread?
Yeah, I've done it several times, so I'm good.
Okay, so what I'm trying to get at here is it could be, can I just show you real simply, because people always asking me, well, what do you want us to do? All right, let's do that. So if I had a slide, and since you guys kind of know how this works, if I had a slide about inquiry-based learning, I could go in and do a Googly search and hit images, and I could look around at these images and find the one that clicks. And then I could pull that in by saving it, as you well know how to do, by saving it and pulling it into my voice thread. So I could go through, how many slides? Well, let's go back and look. 1, 2, you can skip Sir Ken. 3, because he's all about paradigm shifts. 4. So the initial ideas about the theory of online learning, in other words, what Terry is saying in here about how the affordances of the internet allow us to have some really interesting things go on. And then when we come down here to the paradigm shift, what Joel is telling us is that paradigm shifts are very difficult to do, but if we can do them, we then see some amazing things happen, as Ken goes on to say in here. Constructivism, which Dr. Abbott talks about, the idea we all carry around knowledge in our head, and that is what informs us when we are faced with new knowledge. And then, as I showed you, it all gets nicely tied up in a bow. So if you go through and find, by doing simple Google searches, if you do each one of these, in other words, let's do another one. So let's do a Google search on paradigm shift. You're not going to find anything on that, Steve. Au contraire. I'll do a paradigm shift Google search, go up here to images, boom, there they are. And now what I can do is I can go in here and I can grab that picture again that speaks very eloquently to me, to my understanding, put that into my voice thread, record my talking about it, my thinking about it. Now, one of the nice things about the new version of VoiceThread, and let me jump back to that. If you are really uncomfortable with recording your voice, and some of us are, as you can see, I have no qualms about recording my voice. So I'm going to do this right now. I'm going to go ahead and create the course view. Boom. There it is. It's now created for you. And you're going to come into it and you're going to add your own voice thread over here under the plus thing. And you're going to create a new voice thread. And you see it knows it's where it's going to put it. That's what all that was about. So I'm going to create a new voice thread. And now you start looking familiar, right? So if you go in here and you start adding your media, and I'm going to start with my computer, and I'm just going to go grab something. And you know what I'm going to grab because you've been there before with me. There it is. There's my little buddy. One of the nice things about VoiceThread, the first thing it does is before it lets you go any further, it wants you to give it a title. And that way you don't lose it. Okay, so take your time and do that. You probably could just title it your name, 587, or if you want to get creative, go for it. Now, when I'm ready to add the comment, which I think is a bad way of them describing this, it should be comment narration. It should be actually 2 pieces, but they do comment meaning narration. So I'm going to click on the slide. I'm going to come up here to where it says comment. This is what I wanted you to see. You now can click on this, and there is a much bigger place. See how much bigger that is? For you now to be able to type. So if you're more comfortable, in other words, if you're a literate thinker, I don't mean the fact that you're literate. I mean that you like words, you like writing, as opposed to someone who is more of a visual thinker, then feel free to write here instead of recording your voice. Does the same thing. If you do the microphone, you basically click on it. It'll ask you to use your microphone. You allow it, and now it's recording me yakking away. Remember, you can do the pencil if you want. You can pick a pencil, and you can come up here and you can say, really pay attention to this. And then when you're done, you just stop the recording. You'll hear it. And if you like it, then you keep it. If you don't like it, you can start over again. And now it's recording there. I'll stop that. Okay, there you go. That was your, what was that, 30-second how to do voice thread. When you get done with it, what you're going to want to do with it is to put it over into the live text. As you come down here, I clicked on my pancakes, hamburger buns. Did you know those are actual terms for those? And you go and you do an embed, and it does all the work for you, kids. You don't have to worry about anything. Just click on the big button that says copy embed code. Or if you don't want to, if you're not comfortable with that, just get the link. It does the same thing. In fact, for live text, you'll want to get the link. So copy the link, take it over to the live text, paste it in to the place in live text where this goes, and you've done your voice thread. Okay, that's all I've got. I think I feel pretty comfortable about what I just did in terms of what I just gave you. I think it was a very nice, broad picture. What I'm trying to prepare you for is when we go into Module 3 and we jump into knowledge building principles, we are going to directly address how we could go about building this community of learners that we've just been talking about. And the paradigm shift that we will be discussing in Module 3 is the idea of moving kids' ideas about the curriculum to the center, as opposed to the curricular ideas being the center or the teacher ideas being the center. And the teacher and the students then become fellow passengers on this journey of building new knowledge about the curriculum. We do not throw out the curriculum. The curriculum is still there. The curriculum is still valid. But what we try to do, which is what Wiggins and McTeague always talks about, is we try to come to understandings of the curriculum through application. And application in the way that we're going to explore it is all about building community and having people share their ideas, etc. Then in Module 4, what we do is we go in and we look at something called Quality Matters, which is going to give us the framework. So we don't have to guess what we should do. It's going to give us the framework. And then in Module 5, we will take that framework and the idea of community of learners, and we're going to put that together into a Google Classroom. You're going to be done, you realize, you're going to be done with this class by Halloween. I hope that doesn't scare you. I hope that makes you go, wow, that's kind of cool. But we're going to be able to put all this together, because I think what's so nice about this course is all the pieces just fit nicely together. And the fact that we have decided on Google Classroom as our final resting place for all this stuff, and the Quality Matters gives you such a marvelous framework for doing it, then it just becomes a really nice place for you to, you've got a framework, but now you can experiment with how you want to do it. Okay, that's what I've got for this evening. Do you have any final questions before we sign off?
I do have a clarification on the voice thread.
Yep.
So it's going to be 4 slides, one on theory of online learning, paradigm shifts, constructivism, and inquiry-based learning. Is that correct? Okay, just wanted to double check that.
Yeah. And what I want you to do is I want you to synthesize. I'm not looking for you to come up with a present with a bow on top, right? In other words, I'm not saying take all those pieces and synthesize them into one slide. I want to see your understanding of those slides, because when we move next into knowledge building principles, we're going to start putting it all together. That makes sense, Britt?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
All right, dear. Okay. As always, you all know how to reach me, 502-457-2937. Shoot me those questions in the form of a text, and I will get right back with you, I promise. As always, it's a joy being with you. I hope you're enjoying this class. I've really liked this class, if you can't tell, because I think it's one of those things that really has meaning to you as a teacher, but at the same time, it's doing the job of, here's some theoretical building blocks that help you when you sit down and confront it with the idea of coming up with an online environment. You don't end up just falling back into the old way of sit and get, and you have new ideas that you can put into place. Thank you all. I'll see you next Tuesday.
Thanks, Steve.
See you, Steve.